Yo, 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 yo. All right, we are at the quadratic formula. So we're going to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. Here it is. So it's negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And a reminder, these a's, b's, and c's go with quadratic equations that look like this. So the a value that we use in the formula is always a number that's attached to the x squared. The b value is always a value that's attached to the x. And then we have our c, which is always that constant. Okay, so we're just going to get into using the quadratic formula and how to solve. So if we want to use the quadratic formula to solve this equation, well, one, it's not in the standard notation for quadratic equations, right? So because I have the 4x on the right side of the equal sign, so what we're going to do is we're going to subtract 4x to get it on the same side. So I have x squared minus 4x minus 7 equals 0. Quadratic formula works when we're equal to 0. So we do need to be equal to 0 when we're going to use the quadratic formula. So now, what we always do is we always check to see is, hey, can I factor this? Like, is this equation solved by am I able to solve this equation by factoring? Because factoring is easy, and it's quick, and that should always be our first check to see, can I factor this? And the answer is no, because there's no factors of 7 that are going to combine to make 4. So 7 and 1. So I cannot factor it. So this is when the quadratic formula comes into play. Okay. So what we're going to do is we are going to plug in x is equal to whatever the quadratic formula is. So we are going to plug in these values into this formula. I'm going to rewrite it just so we can see it. That's a 2a. So I'm going to replace all of the b's with negative 4. So I'm going to place all this. I'm going to place the c with negative 7, and then because there's nothing in front of, there's no a value, that means it's 1. And I'm going to rewrite the entire formula with all of these values plugged in. So because the b is a negative, I'm making sure I plug in negative 4 for those. A is 1, c is negative 7, so the signs matter. Okay, that's a minus sign, so that's negative. And that's all over 2 times 1. So what I did is I took my a, my b, and my c, and I plugged it into my formula. The biggest thing is when b is negative, make sure you plug in the negative and you still have that negative in front, because that's going to make that a positive. And now I just go through the process of solving this. And I'm going to get 2 answers because of this plus or minus right here. So let's just start simplifying it. I have negative times negative 4, that's positive 4, plus or minus. I'm going to simplify underneath this radical here. 4 squared is 16. Negative 4, and I treat this like a negative 4. So this is negative 4 times 1, which is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 7 is positive 28. And that's all over 2. So I already got a lot more simple to look at by simplifying inside, by simplifying a lot of things here. Now I can do 16 plus 28. So that's x equals 4 plus or minus the square root of 44 all over 2. So this is to the point where we have simplified everything we can, and now I actually have to evaluate this square root. And this is where we are going to evaluate the square roots. Okay, so what I have is I'm going to have 2 different equations. Once I simplify the square root, I'm going to have x is equal to, because I'm really separating this because I have 2 answers here, and that's the positive or negative, right? So I really have x equals 4 plus root 44 over 2. And then I have to simplify x equals 4 minus root 44 over 2. So I need to figure out, well, what is that square root of 44? And then I can start solving from there. So if I figure out the square root of 44, and this is where you're going to need to plug it into a calculator real quick, I get 6.63. So what I have is 4 plus 6.63 all over 2, and then I have 4 minus 6.63 all over 2. Now it's okay if we get a negative, it doesn't matter, right? So this is gonna be 10.63 divided by 2. To give me 5, and I'm gonna round to the nearest hundredth here, and this is gonna give me approximately 5.32. So order of operations, let's just simplify the top and then we'll divide by 2 in the end. So I get x equals 5.32. And then for this one, when I subtract, I'll get a negative, and then we'll divide by 2, and I'll get negative 1.32. So I found my two solutions. My solutions are x equals negative 1.32 and x equals 5.32. These are the two places where that graph is going to cross the x-axis. These are the two solutions for this equation. And these are approximate solutions, so a lot of times when we do approximate solutions, because we rounded it, we use a squiggle equal signs, because that means approximately equal to negative 1.32, 5.32. We had to round because these are irrational answers because they're not perfect squares. And that's it. It's just plugging in values into this formula. Okay, so we'll do this one together, and then we can, I want you guys to try this one on your own. So for this one, I'm going to move everything over to the right-hand side because it looks like I'm going to have more positive values and negative values. I can move the negative x squared over here. It doesn't make a difference. So, but if I subtract 21 and add 4x, I'm going to have x squared plus 4x minus 21 equals 0. So this is what I'm going to plug into the quadratic formula. So that's negative b, so that's going to be negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2 times 1. So I took this equation, I just plugged in my values. Now I can simplify. So that's negative 4 plus or minus. Always simplify in the square root first. And don't try to do too many things at once. That's where people because there's a lot of math going on here. Make sure you rewrite it. Make sure we do the 4 squared, and then I'm actually going to rewrite what I'm adding first before I actually do any addition. Okay, so let's see here. This is 4 squared minus, there we go, plus 84. Ooh, this is going to work out nicely. That means, and we'll talk about what this means. So x equals negative 4 plus or minus square root of 100 all over 2. Well, then x equals negative 4 plus or minus 10 all over 2. Now I can simplify that. Negative 4 plus 10 divided by 2 is 6 over 2, which is 3. Then I'll have negative 4 minus 10 over 2, which is negative 14 over 2, which is negative 7. So for this one, x equals 3, x equals negative 7. Now, I made a big mistake on this one. I didn't check to see if I could factor it, right? But I did want you to practice using the quadratic formula. And so it works every time. So if you can factor it and you don't realize it, it's not a big deal. You're still going to get the final answer. But factors of 7 to negative 3 are going to get me to positive 4 and negative 21. So it was definitely factorable in the beginning, so I didn't have to go through all this. But this is a surefire way to get there if we struggle with factoring. Okay, so now I want you to try this one on your own. Even if it's factorable, I want you to practice using the quadratic formula. So even if you can factor it, use the quadratic formula just to get practice substituting it in. So pause it, try it, see how you do. Okay, so I'm erasing everything just to give us room. So this is going to be x squared minus 2x minus 24 equals 0. Yes, I recognize it is factorable. That's why I wanted you to do it anyways, just to practice using it. So that's going to be negative 2 plus or minus the square root of negative 2 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 24. I'm just going to put this all over 2 times 1. So now I'm going to simplify what I can here. That's going to be 4 plus, let's see here, negative 4 times negative 24, 96. Oh, it worked out nicely again. Look at that, because it was factorable. So that's going to be 10 over 2, because I know this is the square root of 100. So I get my solutions of 2 plus 10 divided by 2 is 6. 2 minus 10 is negative 4. Okay. Now, we can use the quadratic formula to solve word problems, of course. So the function shown represents the height of a frog, x seconds after it jumps off of a rock. This formula should look fairly familiar. It's our vertical motion formula that we learned about. How many seconds is a frog in the air before it lands on the ground? Okay, so how many seconds is the frog in the air before it lands on the ground? So just kind of showing you what the graph will look like here, what we're doing. We know the y-intercept's at 75, that's its starting jumping point. Then he jumps up, and then he's gonna land on the ground, which is here at 0. Okay, so that's what the graph looks like. That's a very, 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 very quick sketch of this, right? But that's our vertical motion. We know it's upside down. We know he starts up here, and then he jumps, and then he's gonna come down and hit the ground. So I wanna know how much time passes before he hits the ground. So I'm really trying to figure out what is this x value right here, because this represents time. This is t, right? So I'm solving it to figure out what my solution is for x. And I have decimals here. This looks like a mess to start working on solving it any other way. So we'll use quadratic formula. So go ahead and pause it again, and then try this one on your own. Set it up just to get that extra practice in. Okay, so negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times negative 16 times 0.75. And now this is when it's all over 2 times negative 16. It's our first time when we actually have an a value here. Okay, so just to kind of skip ahead a little bit, when we simplify this, this is going to be 100, and this is going to simplify to 48. So that's going to give me 148 all over negative 32. And then the square root of 148 is 12.17. All over negative 32. So now I can solve both of these. When I solve them, I'm going to get a negative answer, I'm going to get a positive answer. Okay, so when I solve negative 10 plus 12.17 all over negative 32, when I solve that one and I simplify it, so I'm just doing the top, that's 2.17 divided by negative 0.32, I get negative 0.068. This is not going to be a valuable solution because it's a negative number, and I'm looking for a positive value because I want to know this x value. So I'm going to look at the other one here when I have negative 10 minus 12.17 over negative 32. This one is going to give me a positive answer. And let's see here, it gets me 0.693. So that is how long it takes, and that's my final answer. So that's the amount of time it takes for him to hit the ground. Okay, now there are going to be times when we are actually not going to, we're going to use a quadratic formula, and we're going to get into cases where we don't have a solution. Okay, this is called the discriminant. Okay, so this right here, and we probably should have had this under key terms, but it's okay, is called the discriminant. The discriminant, this is that part of the formula that's underneath the square root. Okay, so the part of the formula that's underneath the square root is known as a discriminant, and it tells us how many solutions we have. If we're going to have one solution, if we're going to have two solutions, or if we're going to have no solution. And it depends if it's going to be a positive number, it's going to means we're automatically going to have two solutions. If this value is a negative number, so if it's less than 0, it's automatically no solution because you can't take the square root of a negative number. But if it's equal to 0, if everything ends up canceling out, that means it's going to be one solution, and that means the vertex is on that x-axis. Okay, so this value right here is known as a discriminant, and it tells us how many roots or how many solutions we have. The solutions are called the roots. So what we can do here is sometimes it's just going to say, hey, tell me how many solutions there are here. So if I want to know how many solutions there are to this equation, I can just plug it into this part of my formula, just plug in the discriminant to figure that out. So I can do negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 3. Well, that's going to give me 16 minus 12, which is 4, so that means there's 2 solutions. And that's all this question's asking me, is just how many solutions are there? And we can figure that out right away by just plugging it into the discriminant, plugging it into this formula right here. There's 2 solutions because it's a positive number, it's greater than 0, so 2 solutions. So if I want to know how many solutions there are for this one right here, then what I can do is I can plug in this into the discriminant. So if I know that that's going to be 4 squared minus 4 times A times C. Alright, well that's 16. This is going to give me minus 16. So I have a negative times a negative times a negative is negative, and 4 times 4 is 16. So I'm going to get 0. Square root of 0 is 0. So there's no plus, because the reason why I know it's going to be one solution, this is just plus or minus 0. Well, that means this all just kind of goes away. So if we're looking at quadratic formula, not Pythagorean theorem, quadratic formula, so that means there's one solution. We know that there's one solution to this equation. And if I look at the rest of the quadratic formula, that negative b, because it's plus or minus all of that, right? Well, that's plus or minus square root of 0, so that goes away. So now my solution is just whatever negative b is over 2a. Well, negative b is negative 4 over 2 times negative 1. That's negative 4 over negative 2, so my only solution is 2 for this equation. That means this has a vertex at x is 2. If it's one solution, the vertex is on the graph, so I know my vertex is going to be at 2, 0, and it's got to be opening downwards because of that negative. Okay. And then finally, we'll have this situation right here. So if I want to know what the solution is to this particular quadratic function or quadratic equation, I would plug in b squared. If I want to know how many solutions there are right away, so I can plug it into the discriminant. So that's negative 4 squared minus 4 times 1 times 5. That's 16. It's not negative 16. It's just 16 minus 20, which is negative 4. That means there's no solution to this particular equation. It's impossible to solve because I cannot take the square root of a negative number. So that means there's no solution. And again, if I were to actually look at the graph of this, it's probably going to look something like this, where it never crosses at 0 here. That's it, guys. That's all I got for you. So know things to remember today, and then independent practice, get it done, solve it, use quadratic formula. And I hope this video helped. If you guys have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, and then we'll get some extra practice in. Thanks for watching. Good to see us out.